As a big fan of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I just wanted to point out what I think is Chris Bohr's worst attempt to look like a comic book fan. Most of his other videos have been torn to bits by the awesome people of YouTube, but no one has touched on this yet. So here it is.
The Ninja Turtles were a big deal back in the 1980s.
What? This is news to me.
And they were everywhere. Cartoons, movies.
Yeah, the 1980s, with movies released in 1990.
Action figures, video games, but rarely does anyone talk about the comics.
Yeah, except for the countless of videos all over the internet, and countless of fan sites and forums. And of course the creators' blogs filled with people talking to them and talking about the good old days, but you wouldn't be aware of that.
And this is where it all started. In fact, the cartoon was based off the comic book, so without the comic, there would have been no cartoon. Now, after releasing my Nintendo review on all 3 Ninja Turtle games, a lot of people were asking why the Turtles were wearing the same colored bandanas on the cover of the first game. And it's probably because the cover was modeled after the comic book version of the Turtles, rather than the cartoon.
It wasn't modeled after them, it's the exact same cover as Michael Dooney painted for the re-release of issue 4 of the TMNT, released in 1987. But you would know that if you would have done any research whatsoever.
In the comics, they all wore the same red-colored bandana, and they only ended up changing the colors for the cartoon so that kids could tell them apart.
Not entirely correct. The deal with the action figures was made first, so the color was changed for the action figure release, so they would be different. The cartoon came later, but not by much. Also, the reason they all had red bandanas was that the original stories were in black and white, and therefore had no use for mist-colored bandanas. But of course you don't mention that, as you only show pictures from a reprint in color that you own.
Now, I was never a reader of the original Turtle comics, because I was much too young for those. Instead, I ended up collecting the ones released by Archie Comics, which was intended for younger audiences, and based off the cartoon show. One really cool thing that they did...
You mean Dean Clarrain, aka Steve Murphy, and Ryan Brown, and those guys? It doesn't kill you to mention their names, or mention that they were all writers and artists working for Mirage, the company that created the TMNT. No need to mention that Archie had nothing to do with this book as I'm publishing it, but oh well.
Was they broke away from the cartoon show, and the writers decided to go off into their own direction with the storyline, and it turned out to be the best thing they could have ever done. At the time, the Ninja Turtle action figures line became very popular, and they were cranking out tons of new characters and figures left and right. They were making so many that they were producing many random figures that hadn't even shown up in the cartoon yet.
Alright, we got Muckman, who appeared in the cartoons and never in the comics.
Are you those garbage men?
Now I call myself Muckman!
2 foot soldiers appeared in both the cartoon, the movie, and both comics. General Trag appeared in some of the first episodes of the TMNT.
We've gotta catch those kids!
Bebop and Rocksteady, everybody remembers them. Panda Khan actually had his own comic book series. Baxter Stockman had been with the cartoon since day 1. Wingnut appeared in the cartoon and in the comics, and was created by Ryan Brown for the Archie comics and for Playmates to make action figures of.
Same thing with Slash, who was used in both comics and cartoon.
I'll smash anything to get a palm tree!
Casey Jones first appeared in the original comics back in 1985, and the Triceratons have been major characters since issue 5 of the original comics.
So where are these characters that were action figures and then appeared only in the comics? Because all of these characters were either already made before either the cartoon or the Archie comics were made, or were made especially for the cartoon or for the action figures. Maybe it's the next frame, because you talk about it so much.
Wait. This is pretty much the same characters. God damn it, Chris. Okay, there are some new ones though. Alright. Super Shredder. Well, he was made only for the second movie, you douche. April O'Neil has been a major character since 1985.
Oh, Mondo Gecko! Well, he first also appeared in the cartoon before making an appearance in the Archie comics.
Here, you give him back this bank loot.
Thanks. The depositors will be really grateful.
Well, since I'm not a part of Mr. X's gang anymore, I guess I'll be moving on.
And he was another creation of Ryan Brown. Usagi is the title character of his own comic book. Chrome Dome only appeared in the cartoons. Metalhead also only appeared in the cartoons. Mutagen Man also only appeared in the cartoons. Leatherhead first appeared in the original comic back in 1987 in an issue of Tales of the TMNT, once again created by Ryan Brown. And that's all the action figures that were not in the first frame. Seriously, you own so few action figures that you have to stock them up again in hopes that people will notice it. Also, you claim that there were characters created by Playmates, when Playmates worked with Peter Laird and Kevin Eastman and the people at Mirage to create these characters.
But the writers at Archie Comics saw this as an opportunity and seized it. They then performed a brilliant move by taking these obscure figures and making storylines around them.
It's not like some writers at Archie headquarters saw a bunch of random figures being tossed out that had nothing to do with TMNT and decided to create backstories for them, because that's how you're making it sound. And there were some characters that were made that didn't appear in the cartoon, but they also didn't appear in the comics. And I see none of them in your pictures.
They made a whole issue about Rayman.
Rayman? That's a fucking video game character. Oh, do you mean Ray Fillet? And once again, it's not like they took a character out of the blue. Ryan Brown created Ray Fillet, who was originally known as Man Ray, and after creating that character for Mirage and TMNT, created a backstory that he gave to Steve Murphy, who then wrote the comic book issue, followed by an action figure being released.
Wingnut and Screwloose. They even took Leatherhead and gave him a backstory different from that on the cartoon show.
That's because the cartoon with Leatherhead premiered much later, you fucking idiot. And no need to mention that Leatherhead has been in the TMNT since 1987, appearing in the original comic timeline, still created by Ryan Brown, by the way, which is why he also had an Archie counterpart.
The comics really came into their own, and what ended up happening was an epic storyline that would span over 25 issues in all.
Actually, it was 70 issues, not counting the special releases and digests and spin-offs.
Now the story ends up being really unique, and during the first 5 issues of the story, the Turtles go all over the landscape, meeting new friends and foes, with the end result always leading back to a battle against Shredder.
The first 5 issues of the story is a sequel to a miniseries done by Mirage's own Michael Dooney, based on the first season of the cartoon. The first 5 issues then feature adaptations done from the cartoon. Issue 1 of the ongoing series was Return of the Shredder, followed by The Incredible Shrinking Turtles. Issue 5 was the first one that had original plot, which was the introduction to Ray Fillet. Of course, Boars would know this if he would done some research, or just open up his comic book issues. I mean, they're right there laying on the ground. Why don't you just check out if you're not making stuff up?
And just in case Chris Boars meant the first 5 issues of the main story, then that doesn't make any sense either. Because those 5 random issues feature the Turtles going to the beach, going to space, where they wrestle, and then going back home where they meet this chameleon guy. They don't go all over the world, and they don't always end up fighting the Shredder.
The next few issues then deals with a huge intergalactic battle that the Turtles must participate in. And after the battle ends, the Turtles are returned to Earth, but dropped off in South America.
That's a really bad way of saying it, but whatever, you suck at storytelling. We are in issue 14 right now, for those who are interested.
And it takes them another 7 issues just to find their way back home.
Actually, it's about 4 issues.
It turns out to be a long and interesting saga, and once they return to the Big Apple, they learn that an alien presence has pretty much been taking over the city during their absence.
They return home to New York in issue 18, and though we are slowly being introduced to Null and Maligna, so are the Turtles. So it's not like it's happening under their nose or something. And we do not jump into some invasion story, it's slowly building up. In fact, they don't battle the alien forces in the final battle until issue 55, which ends with Slash sacrificing himself and the death of the mute animals, Ray Fillet, Mondo Gecko, Leatherhead, all those characters Weird that he didn't mention all that.
And it's during this part of the story that all the plot threads come together to create one fascinating conclusion.
Not really. In fact, the story is not even over till this day. The Archie comics were cancelled before Steve Murphy and Chris Allen could finish their magnificent story arc. The last chapter, called The Forever Wars, was set to get finished sometime during the summer of 2009, after various setbacks. But Viacom bought the franchise from Mirage, so the project was dropped again forever.
Now keep in mind that readers of the comic only received a chapter of the story 1 month at a time, so you're pretty much left with a cliffhanger every month.
My God, it almost sounds like a comic book.
So issue 25 ended by wrapping up all the storylines nicely, but after that, the writers decided to switch gears and went with storylines that took the comic in a really weird and different direction.
Issue 25 saw the end of Bebop and Rocksteady from the story as well as Krang, but the alien invasion you were talking about was still going on. And it was in issue 28, which we were introduced to the Dragon Warrior, also known as Hothead, from the video games, as well as Ninjara, Raphael's girlfriend, who was not only a prominent supporting character in the Archie Turtle comics, but a fan favorite between readers. But according to you, that never happened.
They also ditched the long story arcs and kept the stories very short, and that really sucked.
What? You mean concluding the alien invasion story they had been building up to? Or the Future Shark trilogy, a story arc that introduced the Future Turtles, which became fan favorite characters? I seriously don't understand what you're talking about, but maybe if you told us we would understand, but you don't, because you suck as a reviewer.
I'm not sure if they received a lot of complaints about kids not being able to follow the storyline or what.
Yeah, like the 5-part story Dreamland? Wait, 5 months in being released? Part of another 3-part story that had been released before? What does short mean again? Is that another word for long?
But after issue 25, the entire series just really went downhill, and it wasn't long after that before the entire comic book line was canceled.
Issue 25, released in 1991. Issue 72, released in 1995. Just because you stopped buying the book doesn't mean they canceled it. Also, this is just the main story. They were releasing digests and miniseries up until 1997. And that's just the Archie run, by the way.
I really enjoyed the Archie's take on the Turtles, and they really did a good job with the storyline, even though it's intended for younger audiences.
Well, Archie had nothing to do with the main story. They just published it. It was made by the people who worked at Mirage.
And I think they should reprint this stuff with all the colors reworked, to give it a more modern look. Kind of like what they've been doing with the classic Uncle Scrooge comics that were drawn back around in the 1950s. Stuff looks damn good, eh?
That would be swell, but Mirage is not a big company. They mostly release stuff in black and white, and were set on never releasing any of the former Archie stuff. Most people who wanted to see this re-released knew of the slim chance of ever getting it. So if you were an actual comic fan, you might have known that. A year after this review, 2 trade paperbacks were released for the first time in over 10 years as a part of the 25-year anniversary. The first one was released by Archie, which was the first miniseries in its original color and as a pocketbook. But according to this review, those stories don't exist. The second was released by Mirage, and was the Future Shark trilogy. It was in black and white, but according to this review, those stories do not exist.
Well, the comics may be dead.
Well, that's not true. Archie cancelled all their TMNT stuff in 1997, which is when Image was working on the 3rd volume of the original TMNT stuff, as the full color Volume 2 of TMNT had just ended in 1996, done by Mirage. Volume 3 ended in 2000, with Volume 4 being picked up again by Mirage in 2001, done by Peter Laird and Jim Lawson. Another volume of Tales of the TMNT started in 2004, with various collaborations including Ryan Brown and Steve Murphy, who did so many of the beloved Archie stories you rant about. Both of these series, as well as a ton of miniseries, are still being released. So I don't know what you're talking about.
But let's just hope that a second animated movie is on the way, because I thought the first one was pretty darn cool. Turtle Power!